All right, so this morning's guest speaker is Melissa Ohden. Melissa Ohden, I don't know, you guys, you don't understand like the greatness in the room right now. She is the executive director of her organization, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, the Abortion Survivors Network. But she is a survivor of a failed saline infusion abortion. But like every survivor, she is so much more than a survivor. Melissa is a master's level prepared social worker, the author of You Carried Me, a Daughter's Memoir. She is the founder and director of the Abortion Survivors Network, the only healing and advocacy organization for abortion survivors worldwide, and the Education and Policy Center, which impacts policy issues related to abortion and abortion survivors. Melissa and her team have connected with, as of July 2021, but I bet she has more updates, with 397 survivors. Melissa is a frequent contributor to pro-life and conservative news outlets and a regular guest on radio and television programs around the world. Although Melissa's heart is for providing help and hope to all affected by abortion, she also strives to humanize the unborn through activism. She has testified before congressional committees numerous times, as well as lobbied and even met President Trump in the Oval Office in 2019. She also has a brand new book that just came out, and I'm sure she'll share about that. And you'll have a chance to meet her and grab that book at the end. Please welcome Melissa Ohden to the stage.
I gotta know, how many of you have been to the march before? Raise your hand. Okay, hey, guess what? How many of you have marched in the snow as it was happening? Yeah, adults, you don't get to raise your hand, right? We're like, do you remember like 7 years ago when we were stuck on the side of the road? Yeah, all that to say, you're in for a good day because you will remember this day. And I want you to. Not only because you are surrounded by people who either you knew before you came or you now will know going forward, but also because today reminds us that what we're going to go through today in this march really is nothing compared to what babies are facing every single day, what their mothers are facing, what their families have gone through. And I know this is a tough balance because we do this with joy. We do this to not only take a stand, to remind the world that this is not done yet. We've made progress federally when it comes to legislation, but we know that the fight still exists for life, state after state. So it's this balancing act of showing up and representing and remembering and being mournful of the lives lost and the families forever changed by abortion, but yet we also show up with joy. And that's what we're called to do, because God gave you this life and this opportunity to come together and be a joyful witness. So you have the great opportunity today to do both of those things. Remember why we march and also experience joy. And I have the great opportunity to kind of paint a picture with you about why we march. And I know my introduction sounds pretty stuffy. It is what it is, right? Everybody has one. But the fact of the matter is, I am so much like you. I am a fellow human being, yet my life started very differently than all of yours. Everybody in this room gets to celebrate a birthday. You got to celebrate one already today. But yet, we know that tens of millions of children will never be able to celebrate their birthday. And for me, myself, my birthday is the day that I was accidentally born alive. Many people in our world seem to underestimate what that must be like. I wasn't supposed to have a birthday. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, And yes, it's a little bit heavy, but it's also a story of great joy. And I'm going to educate you a lot today about who abortion survivors are, because I can tell you that this is happening still today. Of course I want that. Oh no, maybe this slide isn't going to work, guys. Looks like maybe my video isn't going to play. Maybe it will. Slowly but surely. I am the survivor of what our world would say is a failed abortion. I'm alive today because an abortion attempt in 1977 failed to end my life. That day I was meant to be delivered as a quote-unquote successful abortion, otherwise known as a deceased child. That is now the day that I celebrate as my birthday. The day that I was accidentally born alive. I didn't know my story though until I was 14 years old. And that day changed my life forever. It's not showing the video at all, is it? But you guys can hear it. When I first found out my story at the age of 14, I felt incredibly alone. Over time, I found out that there was one other abortion survivor, and that was Gianna Jessen, and that changed my life. Fast forward over a decade, and I was actually speaking at the March for Life in Canada at the time, and I'll never forget this young man approached me after the march, and he kind of whispered to me, he said, I'm one of you. I will never forget where we were standing when that conversation occurred. I will never forget him. That really opened my eyes to the fact that not only was I not alone, but people like me are everywhere. We know through statistics from the CDC that they were identifying 400 to 500 live births a year after failed abortions. And if we do the math, that becomes 17,855 survivors. I'm on this mission to find those 17,855 other abortion survivors, to heal them, empower them, equip them to find and use their voice, and at the same time, finding and serving those 17,855 families who have been impacted by a failed abortion. Through the Abortion Survivors Network, we've connected with 403 other abortion survivors from 18 different countries, and they range in age from infants to 89 years old. The overarching goal is we want the world to recognize that every human being is more than a choice. And so in 2012, we became an organization and really started to put out survivor stories, even if it was anonymously, and kind of becoming that first place that was really starting to put that messaging out about failed abortions and survivors. I really kept looking around and saying, why hasn't anybody done something about this? And then I realized in 2019, it's been me all along. And so that's when we became a nonprofit. In the middle of the pandemic in 2020, we started offering community groups that brought in survivors from all around the world. We've healed, we've empowered them with relationships that further that healing, and then we've equipped them by training them to be public speakers, giving them coaching, helping them understand what it's like to advocate and be involved in the pro-life movement. And then we've given them a platform that's safe and credible to then use their voices. I'm so blessed to be alive. I'm so blessed to be a wife and a mother. I'm blessed to be a leader in the pro-life movement. But I can tell you my greatest blessing comes in knowing my fellow community of abortion survivors and creating a place for them in our culture where they're healed, empowered, and equipped, where we're raising their voices for the first time in over 49 years of legalized abortion. Every single survivor's voice is powerful. But the voices of survivors together, that's what changes our world, politically and in families and in individual lives. I know that as we raise their voices, we're not only going to change their lives and we're changing families, but we're going to change our culture. Well, I'm sorry that did not show, but if you guys go to YouTube, our YouTube channel is the Abortion Survivors Network, and you can actually come across that video and videos of other survivors. But the good news is I'm going to show you photos of other survivors today as well, so we can deal with a link that doesn't want to work. So now you know a little bit about my own story and who I am. And what you started to hear in that video, whether you could see the photos in it or not, the reality is that babies survive abortions. Babies were surviving abortions before Roe versus Wade legalized it here in the United States. Many babies like me survived during Roe versus Wade. You wouldn't know it by what the media and the abortion industry talked about, both during Roe and after. And I can tell you that babies are still surviving abortions today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as I close my time with you this morning. But what we need to ensure that people understand in our world is that there is always hope. There is hope even after abortion for men and women and families who are impacted by it. There's hope for abortion clinic workers and abortionists. Some of my best friends are former abortionists and former clinic workers like Abby Johnson. There is hope for them. And our world needs to hear that reality, that there is always hope. And that is part of our mission at the Abortion Survivors Network, is to reach people with that message. One of the common questions we get from women today is, I took both abortion pills and I found out I'm still pregnant. What have I done? Is there any hope for my baby? There is hope. And we have to reach them with that hope. And so as you start to encounter more people who are going through this, you have the great opportunity to come alongside and be part of our movement to say, you know what, there's still hope for your baby. There's still hope for you as a mother. There's hope for your family. We know that people who have answers to the questions you have, that's the work that we do. So I want to talk a little bit about who an abortion survivor is. Sometimes we hear the word abortion survivor used for lots of different people. And as you can imagine, being who I am and doing the work that I do, lots of people, especially on social media, like to come at me and go, oh, you guys, you really haven't met hundreds of other abortion survivors. This doesn't happen to thousands of people a year. You guys call everybody an abortion survivor. No, we use it very tightly. For us, an abortion survivor is simply anyone who survived an attempt to abort them in the womb. And for us, statistically, you heard in my introduction, a few years ago, we had connected with a little under 400. We are over 700 and some right now. But that is really the tip of the iceberg. The reality is this is happening day in and day out. So that's who an abortion survivor is. So you're going to learn today how an abortion survivor comes to be, because that's a very common question, right? Well, how does this happen? You're going to come face to face with some of these survivors in my next slides. But so you know, right, this happens in chemical abortion, so both abortion pills. There's lots of surgical abortions. When I've testified before Congress, sometimes they've been pretty dismissive of me and said, Melissa, that type of abortion that you survived isn't done routinely anymore, so you're not even relevant to this conversation. Really? I'm pretty sure I'm still relevant to the conversation. And so are all of you, right? We're given a voice and a life for a reason. We're relevant to this conversation, to be voices for other people who don't have one. There are many at-home methods to induce abortion. If you guys haven't noticed the uptick in this after Roe was overturned, we see it all the time on YouTube, in social media. There are so many sites popping up talking to women about how to induce an abortion at home. That is unsafe, of course, for the baby. It's unsafe for the woman as well, and we have to be aware that this is happening. There are lots of successful abortion pill reversals. Those babies are abortion survivors, you guys. When we hear about APR, a baby who survives abortion pill reversal, yeah, they're a survivor too. So there are hundreds of them a year in the United States alone. We have instances where women stop their abortions during the procedure that results in the baby surviving, and we have lots of twins. So a failed abortion is simply when that method of abortion fails to end the baby's life. So that occurs across all methods. There's not a lot of research about it. That's part of what we do, is try to gather the research and then help disseminate it so people can understand it. There's under 10 research studies really when it comes to failed and stopped abortions and its impact. So we're looking to fill that research gap. But many survivors have even survived multiple attempts to abort them. So we have folks who survived, say, 2 chemical abortion attempts and a follow-up D&C. That's sort of hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? Miracles happen. There's a reason why we have the shirts that we do. It is an absolute miracle for babies to survive what they have. But I've seen folks who survive even dismemberment abortions. This is really awful to have to talk about, but I need you to understand that it does indeed happen. There's a young man in his 20s in Indiana. You may have seen his name before. His name is Nick Hoot. He was a great wrestler when he was in high school. Nick survived a dismemberment abortion. He's missing parts of all of his limbs. Of course, the abortion industry tries to say, well, no way, that couldn't have happened. Well, yes, it can, and it's in his files. And we have former abortionists who look at records when we have them. Most survivors do not have medical records. I am one of the few who has my medical records that detail that I soaked in a toxic salt solution for 5 days. I was being poisoned and scalded and should have been delivered dead. I am one of those who survived a failed abortion. Other survivors of failed abortion, some of you probably recognize the name of my friend Claire. So Claire's out of Texas. She survived a D&E abortion, so it successfully took the life of her twin. In cases like that, what happens is typically an adequate exam is not done. That's also why many of us exist, right? I now know my abortionist did not provide an adequate exam. My medical records state he thought I was about 18 to 20 weeks gestation. When I was ultimately rushed off to the NICU, a doctor remarked I was probably 31 weeks. 31 weeks. So in cases like Claire's, there was not an adequate exam done. The abortionist didn't know that her 13-year-old birth mom was pregnant with twins. So she saw the parts of a baby and the blood from her abortion and thought it was successful. The abortionist thought so too. And then weeks turned into months and she had all these pregnancy symptoms, and that's when they realized she had been carrying twins. There are lots of instances like that. And we have lots of folks who survived at-home attempts to abort them. Willard and Karen, that you see on the screen, are 2 of those survivors. So they both survived at-home attempts to abort them before Roe. Did you know that these folks are abortion survivors? Who's a soccer fan in here? Cristiano Ronaldo? Did you know that he's an abortion survivor? He survived an at-home attempt to abort him. My 9-year-old is probably his biggest fan. And for me, one of the greatest joys is that she gets to know that he is so much like me. But our culture likes to gloss over that too, don't they? We don't hear it often. Also, Pastor Jack Hibbs from Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills. He's an amazing guy. He survived a coat hanger attempt to abort him. And again, we shouldn't have to talk about this stuff, you guys, but I need you to understand that this has happened and is still happening. So when we have other people, maybe today, who are at the Supreme Court shaking their coat hangers and saying, we won't go back. We don't want to go back either, for the sake of the babies, like Jack, for the women, like his mother. But when they are holding up that coat hanger, they don't even know what they're talking about. A stopped abortion is when a woman actually stops her abortion. And so we often see it when it's much further along for it to be completed successfully, and I'm going to share more about that in just a second, maybe because of the physical pain of it, or even regret when it is, say, a multi-step procedure. I am always very honest with women when they stop their abortion. There is some risk to her health. There is risk about the baby's health because there can be things like, leaking amniotic fluid, a ruptured amniotic sac. Some folks might go on bed rest. But again, there is always hope, and you are going to get to see that hope. So some of the hopes the survivors of stopped abortions, my friend Jennifer Milbourne is out of California. She survived a vacuum aspiration abortion in Illinois. The abortionist should have successfully vacuumed her completely out of the womb. But when he started the procedure, her head was too big. That's why Jen survived. She was much further along than what the abortionist thought. And so he had to stop it and said, you're going to have to come back and have a different procedure. And it's going to cost more money. Thankfully, her biological mom didn't follow through with that. Lauren Eden, she's actually here. If anybody's going to the Students for Life Summit at all tomorrow, we have a panel of 5 abortion survivors who are speaking at that. But you've probably seen them at the expo this week. If they were at our table, they were probably an abortion survivor, and you never would guess it. But Lauren is out of Georgia, and she survived a late-term abortion that her mom stopped because she had so much regret. And it's a story of so many miracles. If you go to our YouTube channel, we shared videos of her mom and her story, and also a member of their church who took her mom in when she stopped that abortion as a college student and had nowhere to go, nowhere to live. Those are incredibly beautiful stories for people to follow. My next book also that I have here with me today includes a story of a young survivor. This is a stock photo. We don't share her photo yet, but she's about 12 years old now. And you can read in my new book how her mom stopped her late-term abortion because she heard the voice of God time and time again telling her that she needed to stop. In this case, this survivor knows her story because our team has worked with the family. And I know that's hard for people to kind of comprehend, right? Why would you tell a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old their story? That's part of the work that we do, is trusting families and helping support them as they walk through that. So there's lots of ways somebody survives a stopped abortion. I'm gonna guess this video isn't gonna do what I want. But this is the story of Kieran and Lauren. Do you guys wanna listen to it? Yeah, okay. Good, right answer. Maybe. Nope. I'm gonna mess with it. Actually, I might just search here. Ah. It really doesn't want to behave. Do you know, Michelle, is there a way for me to just hop on YouTube? Does this have? We have an internet connection on there. Okay.
I'm not Michelle.
Are you sure?
We're not into that thing.
Okay, good news. I think I'm going to find it quickly.
All right.
Thank you for your patience, you guys. Okay, we're going to get it. I'm going to share with you the story of Karen, who stopped her abortion.
When I was 18 years old, I found myself pregnant. I never viewed...
Look at you. Yay! I should have called them up here the first time. All right, working back.
The baby as a human. I viewed the baby just as a problem. Just thought that, the sooner I get rid of the problem, the better and the easier it will be to go on with my life. When I found out I was pregnant, I was about 8 weeks pregnant. I planned to go to Tulsa to get an abortion. My best friend from high school drove up. I had an address, I had an appointment, and we headed out. And whatever address we went to the wrong address. There was no abortion clinic. So we had to find a payphone and call the clinic to say, hey, where are you? As it turned out, they were on the opposite side of town. There was no way that we could get there in my allotted appointment time. So it was a case of, sorry, you're gonna have to reschedule and come back. I went back to Fayetteville, Arkansas, dejected, upset, and rescheduled for the following week. My same best friend came and drove me to Tulsa, and we did go to the correct clinic. They did abortions to 12 weeks in Oklahoma at the time. And at the time, I should have been about 10 weeks pregnant. When they did the ultrasound, I was over 12 weeks. So they turned me down. They wouldn't do the abortion. Defeated once again. So I went back to Fayetteville. I knew that I could get an abortion in Little Rock up to 15 weeks. So I made an appointment. Another friend from high school was going to drive me. My boyfriend at the time, William, agreed to drive me to where she lived. For some unexplained reason, the night that he was driving me, it was so foggy that we couldn't even see the lines on the road. Of course, I was so determined to have an abortion. It finally reached the point where we couldn't continue. It wasn't safe. And so we went back to Fayetteville, and my friend agreed to pick me up the next morning and then drive to Little Rock. First thing they did was an ultrasound. I measured 15.3 weeks. Defeated again. We had no choice, but to turn around and go back. Mission not accomplished. It just seemed so obvious that something larger than myself was controlling what was happening. The clinic in Little Rock told me that I could go to Dallas, Texas, and that they did abortions to 20 weeks. I went to 2 clinics in Dallas. The first one, they did abortions to 20 weeks. They did an ultrasound. I measured 21.6 weeks. The numbers did not align with how pregnant I was. I had a meltdown in the clinic. They gave me another address and sent me to a second clinic that did abortions to 22 weeks. I knew that if I left there and went to the next clinic, it wouldn't happen. And so I confirmed, can I take this ultrasound with me? Will they accept this? Because if there's another ultrasound done, I'm out of luck, like always. They called, they set it up, they said they would accept that ultrasound. So we headed to the second clinic. Instead of doing an ultrasound, they basically started the procedure. They inserted the laminaria, and my friend and I went back to her sister's house. I had been so determined to have the abortion that I never considered the humanity of it or the loss of it or the reality of what was happening. I was just hell-bent on eliminating the problem. At the same time, William wouldn't leave me alone that night. He was calling constantly, trying to talk me out of having the abortion. I was hurting and scared. Around midnight, I finally told him, if you'll come to Dallas and be with me, then I'm 95% sure I won't have the abortion. He got up at 4 in the morning, and drove to Dallas to meet me at the clinic. So when I got off the elevator, he was standing there. And he went with me into the doctor's office, and I told him that I had changed my mind. And he told me that there was a very good chance that at this point I would miscarry anyway. I made the decision to put the baby up for adoption. On July 26th, 1982, very early in the morning, I woke up in the middle of the night and everything was wrong. Bill and Jana, the couple that I was living with, I went into their bedroom and woke Jana up and told her that something's not right. And so she told me that we needed to go to the hospital. She was born at 8:23 in the morning. She was 13 weeks premature. One of the nurses asked if I'd like to see her. I said yes. And when I saw her, I knew I couldn't give her up. But at the same time, I didn't have a plan. Bill and Jana were a young married couple at the time with 2 small children. Bill and Jana saw a need. They gave themselves. They gave their home. They made their lives uncertain because of me, a stranger. They were the no judgment zone. William and I did end up getting married, and we have 2 other children, and we put the abortion papers in a box and set it high on the shelf, and it wasn't something we talked about. Lauren came home from college. We had never told her any of this. I can only explain it as it's one of the few times in my life that I knew that God was speaking to me. I knew that I had to go home and tell Lauren her story. So I went home and we went into her room and shut the door, and I told her the same story. I told her, I don't know why, but I know that God wants me to tell you this, and we never meant for it to be a secret. How ironic is that? The baby that I rejected, I was worried about her rejecting me. I told her, I don't see myself ever telling this story, but you have my permission to tell it, because I just don't feel like I can. It's like all of those feelings that are inside that box on the shelf, it exploded. Looking back on it now, there was a lot of trauma involved. I can't imagine the trauma that would be there if you had actually had an abortion. I'm only beginning to deal with my own guilt and shame that I didn't even know I had. But when I pulled the box off the shelf and opened it, it exposed all of that crud inside. It's taken 40 years for me to realize that stuffing it all away, it has totally impacted my life. That baby that, I fought to get rid of and then fought to keep, I love her so much. I can't imagine life without her. I see her kids and think if I had gotten what I wanted, then they wouldn't be here. Lauren's the one that made me a mom.
There's a lot to unpack there, isn't there? Probably a lot you found surprising, starting with how determined she was to have that abortion. I know that in and of itself is hard for a lot of people to listen to, but I hope that you can understand from that that's just how determined and how hopeless she was at the time.
She was born at 8:20.
I might need you again, tech guy.
She was 13.
I'm afraid to close stuff out.
The nurses asked if I'd like to see her. I said yes. And when I saw her, I knew I couldn't give her up. But at the same time, I didn't have a plan.
Job security.
Bill and Jana were a young married couple at the time with 2 small children.
As he's fixing that, I do want to reference that video just a little bit. I hope that sometime after today, you guys talk a little bit about everything that you heard in their story. Because she was a college student at the time. What you don't hear in that video, but we share in other videos and even podcast interviews, is that she had a lot of life circumstances in her family where she felt like she was completely unsupported. She had nowhere to live, nowhere to go. She was going to be the first person in her family to graduate from college. And I share that because that is not a unique circumstance. There are so many women still in our world today who are in shoes very similar to hers. And so there's a lot that we can learn from what she walked through, both from being determined, going across state lines to have that abortion time and time again. I think the role of William as a man is incredibly important. And guys, I hope you took big note of that. William saved his daughter's life. What you didn't hear in that video is that for months he had been trying to get her to not have an abortion. Yet he drove her that time in the fog, right? Because he felt like maybe that was the only thing that would happen. But yet, in the last minute, he was able to spare his child's life. That's how we're all called to be a part in this. So be a William. You can see more of their stories on our YouTube channel. Other survivors, obviously, too, that we want to talk about are those who survived successful abortion pill reversal, as you see on this slide. So Heartbeat International does great work helping pregnancy centers with abortion pill reversal. What we do at the Abortion Survivors Network is we serve women right now who have questions after taking the abortion pill. They're wondering if they're still pregnant. Maybe they're going through a successful abortion pill reversal and they need support. Like you heard in even that video with Lauren's mom, Karen, she's still dealing with the guilt and the shame, right? She put it in a box thinking that she could keep it there, but what it was doing was running around her life all those years. And so we see that even with women who undergo successful abortion pill reversal. There is still shame and guilt and issues with bonding with their child and attachment, but that's okay because we can work with those things as long as we talk about them. So these are some babies who survived successful abortion pill reversals. You can go on Heartbeat International's website and see many of those. So lots and lots of APR kiddos who go on to lead very healthy, normal lives. Yes, there are some abortion survivors of various procedures, even the same one that I've survived. Many of you know my friend Gianna Jessen, right? Gianna survived the same procedure I did. We were born in the same year. Gianna has cerebral palsy as a result of lack of oxygen. That's not my story, right? That was not my outcome. We're all different person to person. I have invisible scars that nobody can see. So I want to talk a little bit this morning, too, about how often this happens. This is a pretty interesting quote if you've never seen it or heard it before. Live births are little known because organized medicine, from fear of public clamor and legal action, treats them more as an embarrassment to be hushed up than a problem to be solved. So they knew decades ago how often babies were surviving abortions. And they knew they didn't want the public to know about it. Because what would people start to think about if they saw all of the abortion survivors? They would understand the humanity of every preborn child, right? So as I shared earlier, there is no significant body of literature, but we're working on that. We know a lot about abortion survivors from other countries. Canada really has the best statistics, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that this morning. Canada has had some eye-opening reports, as you can see on this slide. Western Australia, and actually Australia in and of itself, reports out a lot of abortion statistics. I'm going to show you what that incidence looks like here in just a second. What it means is when we look at Canada and Australia, and Canada really is the best, because of their socialized medicine, they report out a lot of statistics. What our team did was take the number of failed abortions resulting in live births in Canada, and they've ran it year after year after year. They looked at it, and it's about 0.21% consistently year after year. Interestingly enough, when we look at Australia, they have a very similar failure rate. Now, sometimes, on social media, people like to go, oh gosh, 0.21%, what are you guys whining about? That's nothing. Well, it is something to the baby who loses their life. And it's something to the woman who goes through it and the family who's impacted by it. So 0.21% is a pretty big deal. And then when you start running the numbers, it becomes a very, very big deal very quickly. So what it looks like is that in the last reporting period, when you correlate 0.21% to the United States, and you can go to our website, you can look at maps and things that we've mapped out, it looks like 1,734 survivors in the United States in that reporting period. That does not include reversals, at-home attempts to abort, or chemical abortion survivors, because we can't even accurately get those numbers reported out. So, thousands of babies survive abortions every year. How long do they live? We don't always know. Are they aborted after they've survived the first attempt? Yes. Sadly, I see it when we work with moms. That is one of the hardest things I have to do in the work that I do. Do all those survivors know their story? No. So there's lots of reasons why we don't hear from all of these survivors. But when you start to total up 1,734 year after year, you guys, you could fill a Super Bowl stadium with the number of babies who have survived abortions in the United States based on that correlated data. That's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it? For us, we've reached over 710. And as I shared in a podcast last night, it's really hard for us to even report our data right now because a lot of our survivors are babies who are still in utero. And I can't count them as a survivor until they're actually born. Because right now I know that they're at risk of being aborted again. We had one baby born this summer. His name is Bofello, which means life. And his mom was going to abort him a second time after her chemical abortion failed. And months passed. She thought it had been successful, but she was starting to have all sorts of stomach pain. Went to her doctor and found out she was still pregnant. She was going to abort him again until she came into contact with us. This is why all of us do what we do. So I want to talk a little bit about chemical abortions. The little guy that you see there on the screen, I blacked out his face. He is the survivor of a chemical abortion. I got to hold him in the last couple of years. He's actually getting bigger and bigger. He's probably about 3 years old now, or soon will be 3 or 4. I lose track. But I get to see all these survivors who are growing up, celebrating birthdays, going to preschool, starting school. I want to share a little bit about his story with you because it will show you the important work of pregnancy centers. This little guy's mom went to a pregnancy center and received all the information, yet still went to an abortion clinic and got the abortion pills. She took them, like many women, right? Like most women, she believed it was successful. And as months went by, she knew that there was something going on with her. She kept calling the abortion clinic and they weren't responding to her. And over time, she remembered that there was a place that she could go that she could trust the people. So she went back to the pregnancy center. It didn't take them long to realize that she was still pregnant. They performed an ultrasound and realized that she was nearly full term with a baby she took both abortion pills with. She ultimately made an adoption plan for him. But think with me for just a minute, what would have happened if the abortion clinic would have responded to her calls? Would that little guy be alive today? Probably not. Because the treatment of a baby who survives an abortion is another abortion. That's the power of the relationships you make with people. That's the important work of pregnancy centers to being a trustworthy place. You guys take your relationships with people to be so important because you never know what somebody is going through. Do not be afraid to speak the truth in love to people so they know what abortion is, but also so they know where to get help and that you are somebody that they can trust and talk to. There's a lot I could talk about today, and I'm available after this morning if you want to ask me any question. We've got some materials on the table. 2 of them, and I didn't bring them up here with me, but we have a bunch of different pamphlets, but there's two of them in particular, you guys, that I think are really important for you guys. Two that talk about chemical abortions, and it kind of looks like a phone and a text message. And so a woman talking to another saying, like I took both abortion pills and I think I'm still pregnant. Those are good ones to have on hand for your pro-life groups, so that when somebody is going through this, they can know that, hey, guess what? Your abortion pills can fail. And if they do, there is hope, and there is a place like us that they can turn to. So as we close today, I'll be available to answer any questions. You might have a lot of questions. You can grab some materials. I'll actually leave some here today as well. And I do have my new book that I am happy to sign and to sell to anybody who's interested. Thank you guys so much for what you are doing. Thank you for your attention this morning as we dealt with some technology. Michelle, do we have time? Do we want to open it up to questions at large? Okay. For once, I allowed time for questions out loud. It's okay, you can ask me anything. I see a hand up there. You say it and I'll say it loudly. What's the relationship like with my birth mother? Yep, so my story is one of twists and turns. So I survived that saline abortion. I was left for dead, and I now know that a nurse at that hospital did not follow the orders to leave me to die and rushed me off to the NICU at that hospital. I know that because God has brought all of these people into my life who have been able to share the part that they played in it. So these are things that I have figured out over the course of like 40 some years of my life. So I now know that I was whisked off to the NICU. I have a relationship with one of the nurses who took care of me in the NICU. And what I never could have imagined is that day, my birth mother was told that the abortion was successful. She was told that it had taken my life, right? Those aren't the words they used. It was, the problem has been taken care of. This is done. My birth mother was 19. She did not want to have that abortion. She was forced by her family to do it. And when I say forced, I mean forced. Her mother was a nurse at that hospital, supervised a lot of the nurses, worked hand in hand with that doctor who was either delivering babies as an OB or performing abortions. So my grandmother is the one who told the nurses to leave me to die that day. And you guys, that is hard, I know, for people to hear, but I want you to understand that that is where God's grace comes in. Because I love my grandmother as a fellow human being. There is nothing I have ever learned about her. Yes, have I gone through periods of anger, right, and uncertainty and thinking, how could you? But at the end of the day, Jesus died for her as much as he died for you and me. And that changes everything. So my grandmother told the nurses to leave me to die. My grandmother is the one who carried out that secret that I was alive, and I was ultimately placed for adoption without my birth mother knowing that. Fast forward, I was 14 when I found out my story, and there is no good time to find out this story, if I'm being honest, right? But that is also why I do the work that I do, so we can come alongside families and say, man, there is a better way we can have this conversation. And we have people who can support you every step of that journey. So that 12-year-old is not alone, right? I get to send her gifts, and I'm writing a children's book for survivors, so survivors know from a young age, we don't need to be ashamed of who we are. We have an identity, right? I am who I am. God created me, and I don't have to be ashamed of that. But I found out my story when I was just about many of your age. Went through a really traumatic time in my life, but I'm grateful that God stood by my side and reminded me time and time again who he created me to be. Ultimately, I found out who my birth parents were when I was about 30, and then I continued on a journey to find them. When I found out who they were, I was living in the same city as my biological father. I gave birth to my oldest daughter, who was almost 16, at the same hospital where my life was supposed to end. because God restores all things. And ultimately got to know who my birth mother was. My birth father died before we ever could establish a relationship. My birth mother is now a huge part of my life. I live in Kansas City. Anybody else from Missouri around here? Hey, exactly. Hopefully we make it home, right? When I moved to Kansas City about 11 years ago, what I did not know is that my birth mom lives in the Kansas City metro, along with one of my half-sisters. So I see my birth mother, Ruth, very frequently. My mom and dad just met Ruth for the first time, even though Ruth and I have communicated now for about 11 years. But it is an incredible blessing to have all of this ultimately redeemed and restored. But think for a minute what Ruth's life would have been like if I wouldn't have survived. I am the one saving grace for her in the midst of something incredibly traumatic. So it's an incredible God story. Other questions? Yeah, I'm gonna go over here and then I'll go back there.
Amongst people who remain very pro-choice after they hear your story, what does their argument sound like?
Great question. So for those who remain pro-choice after hearing a story like mine, what's their main argument? It goes a little something like this usually. I'm not talking about people like you. And I'm like, so which ones are we talking about? The ones who actually lose their lives to abortion and you don't have to hear their story? That's how that usually goes. You know, it's been really interesting after Roe was overturned. And right, in a world that talks about believing victims and supporting women and Me Too, right, and all these things, the message that we get as survivors is like, hey, yeah, everybody but you guys, zip it. They will say things like, how dare you use survivors to advance your agenda to restrict women's rights to abortion? I've actually said to members of Congress multiple times, like, I want you guys to reconcile the fact that I, as a woman, supposedly have this right to an abortion, but if I was never born, I would never have a single right. Right? Without the right to being born, there is no other right to come. And I can tell you, no members of Congress have ever gone, huh, yeah, that makes sense, right? No. But you have to think that you're planting seeds with people. I told that story last night in a podcast too. Senator Feinstein, who recently passed away, there was a time that I testified before her in a committee and I kept raising this question about women and their rights and asking about mine. And what I didn't tell people is she actually approached me after one hearing and she said, I just want you to know I heard you today. And of course, friends of mine were like, Melissa, but she never changed her stance. And I said, at least publicly, right? I have to go into every single one of those things believing that I'm planting a seed every single time. Do I get tired of it? Yeah, I sort of do if I'm being honest, but, right, we're still called to plant the seeds. So plant the seeds. I'm gonna go to that question back there. Which abortion procedure has the highest failure rate? So those statistics are hard these days. What I can tell you is that back in the 1970s, I was it, right? That saline infusion abortion had the highest rate of failure. And they were very clear. You guys can actually read an article called The Dreaded Complication. It came out of the Philadelphia Inquirer in 1981, and it was up for a Pulitzer Prize. But it's a hard read because you read lots of stories like mine with different outcomes based on who was working at the hospitals. But they were very clear that's why they moved on to other abortion methods and stopped doing this one as frequently as they were because it resulted in such a high incidence of live births. It's pretty telling when the abortion industry themselves can tell us that, isn't it? Any other questions? I think we're right on the dot, Michelle. Oh, can we do one in the back, Michelle? Okay, that one back there. Yes. Yes, we get those too, right? And folks who would go, you know what? Survivors who experience abuse and neglect in their home Because some do, right? Especially when there's a lack of healing in that family, when that family was impacted by the abortion and then the abortion that failed, or they stopped it or reversed it and they keep the secret, right? And it just continues to grow in that family. And then there's abuse and neglect. And so the response is like they were better off dead. That is not ever the solution to anything anyone is going through in their lives. No one has ever wanted to put themselves in the shoes of an abortion survivor. And instead of offering death as a solution to something somebody has gone through in their life, how about those folks stand up and do something to help support people in what they're going through? Because that's what it is, right? It's just this abstract concept that somehow death would be better. We know that that is not the answer. Are there some abortion survivors who are pro-choice, you guys? Yeah, there are. And we still support them too with where they're at. But I can tell you time and time again, when they share their story, what it is full of pain, right? What I hear from them is, I've gone through this, this, and this in my life, and I don't want anybody else to suffer the way that I have. So maybe it would have been better for that abortion to have occurred, or for a woman to have an abortion. And you can hear through that, right, the pain that exists there. So we have to address the circumstances, not be rubber stamping death as the answer to somebody's experience or circumstances. All right, Michelle, thumbs up. All right, break, dress warmly.